you guys are on the committees that are really making a lot of the differences. We could maybe start with you, Congressman Crawford.
Sure. Well, I represent the 1st District of Arkansas, and so as everybody knows, it's the epicenter of ag production. Of course, it's important to the entire state, but it's certainly important to folks here. And I serve on the Ag Committee, I serve on the Transportation Committee. And why that's important is obviously water resources, things of that nature, just moving your products from the farm to the market, variety of jurisdictional issues there that impact agriculture. And then the other committee I serve on is the Intelligence Committee, and y'all might think, well, what's that got to do with agriculture? A lot more to it than you might realize. In fact, I was lucky to get on that committee and kind of made it a point to try to find the nexus between agriculture and intelligence. And food security is national security, and where that's threatened, that becomes the nexus for intelligence. And so we've been really paying close attention to some of the things that are going on, particularly with China, that threaten our food supply, and so we can talk about that in some greater detail.
Absolutely. And I know when we were just in Hot Springs together, your wife has said, let's stop talking about water, because everyone wanted to be talking about water. It's a huge topic with the agriculture community, though, and it's super important. We have some really good irrigation projects that are just right up the road from us and down the street. You want to talk to us a little bit about the importance of water and your new committee role that you're going to be chair of?
Thank you, Seth. It's great to be here in the 1st District in Riggs. We'll try that again. It's great to be here in the 1st District of Riggs. I'm Chris Westerman. I represent the 4th District, and I'm not sure my microphone's on. Can you all hear me? Yeah, this one's working much better, I think. And, you know, Rick hit the nail on the head. This is the epicenter of agriculture for Arkansas. And when you combine the 1st District and the 4th District, you've got just about the whole Monty there on agriculture in Arkansas. When you consider row crop farming, cattle, poultry, and forestry, our 2 large districts take up a huge amount of that. And you know, our agriculture is the largest part of Arkansas's economy, and it's something that's not only important here, but it's important to the nation, and I think it's only going to become more important as we're seeing drought out west. I think there's going to be more demand on Arkansas to produce the products that the country and the world needs. And, you know, it's an honor to serve with Rick. He's on the Agriculture Committee. He'll be dealing firsthand on the Farm Bill. We served together on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, and I will be the chairman of the Natural Resources Committee, which we deal with a lot of forestry issues, a lot of water issues that don't necessarily affect Arkansas but are very important in the West. But I can tell you it's all tied together, and they're simply just out of water in the West. They've pumped the aquifers about as dry as they can pump them this summer, trying to grow crops. There were 600,000 acres of land that lay fallow in the Central Valley of California. Arizona, where the only place where they grow winter lettuce, they're out of water there. So it can put a real strain on the U.S. food supply, which I think states like Arkansas, who are blessed with water, are going to have to be the ones that come along and pick up the pieces. And I think it provides a great opportunity for us to diversify more, to maybe figure out how to grow crops that have higher per acre value, and to really solidify an already very strong stance that Arkansas has in the world, on the world stage in agriculture.
Another really important point when you talk about folks in the agriculture community really want to know is labor. Congressman Crawford, I know that you've spoke at length and you have a really good plan that makes a whole lot of sense, but 9 times out of 10, it's going to be coming back to there's not enough people, we can't pay people. You want to speak a little bit to what your plan is and how important that is for agriculture?
Sure. Just a show of hands, how many people here have availed themselves of the H-2A program? You know, anywhere you go, I mean, you got people farmers that rely on the H-2A program. A couple of things to consider. One is it's kind of a travesty that we have to outsource our labor and rely on a migrant workforce. Nothing against the migrant workforce, but we should be able to do for ourselves. But we put ourselves in a position that it's hard to find people that are willing to work. And so we rely on a migrant workforce, and then we rely on a program that's really not very well managed, and it's very costly to you, the user of the program. So earlier in this Congress, I was tasked with chairing an ad hoc committee to address ag workforce reform. And the plan that we came up with was, let's not try to reform H-2A. H-2A is a really big problem. It resides in the Department of Labor. That adds to the problem and the complexity and to the cost. So the idea was to sort of replicate H-2A, but put it under USDA and put it under an administration, an agency that you work with every day, and that's the FSA. So I talked to some folks, and they said, yeah, FSA has the bandwidth to administer a program like this. It doesn't look exactly like the H-2A program. It has a lot of improvements to it, but it essentially is an alternative to the H-2A program that would be administered by an agency that's better equipped to deal with ag work. And so that's the idea. I don't know what the odds are. We have legislative text that we're prepared to introduce in the next Congress. I wouldn't, right now when we start talking about a migrant workforce, the topic of our unsecure border is going to come up. And so it's not something that people are really open to right now, but we know it's an issue that we have to deal with because the H-2A program continues to be very convoluted and very costly to our ag producers.
Yeah, and I think that's a great idea that Rick has. I would go a little further and say put the H-2B visa workers in that same program. That deals a lot with forestry. If we didn't have H-2B visas, we probably wouldn't get trees planted in the country anymore. And it's a shame that the guest worker program's getting lumped in with immigration because they're two separate issues. And those guest worker visas are something that actually work, where you can track people when they come here. You know how long they're here, and you can keep up with them. It's totally different from somebody coming into the country illegally. But on a bigger scale, we do have to get everybody back to work. There's not been a single employer that I've talked to in the last 2 or 3 years that hasn't told me that they've got problems finding labor. And I don't know if it's because of all the government programs and COVID, but for some reason we have lost people out of the workforce. The labor participation rate is too low, and we've got a unemployment rate that looks like it's low, but it's low because there's not enough people in the labor pool. So we've got to do more to encourage people to get back to work, but we also need to fix these programs, or not fix them, but make them even better, that deal with guest workers because they're so critical to meeting the needs that we have, not just in agriculture, but in some other areas as well.
Bruce identified one of the areas, one of the flaws with migrant or guest worker, and H-2A doesn't allow for things like forestry, doesn't allow for things like working in dairy and further processing. And so what we did was we expanded on that as he suggested and said what we want is a guest worker program that actually expands the eligibility to include forestry and to include dairy and to include other areas of ag that have historically been not included in the H-2A program. So that's an important point that you raised there, and we actually did address it in this legislative text. So if we are able to go forward with this, it will certainly be a broader definition of an ag worker.
I was just going to say, Congressman, the H-2A program, it's all we've got right now. It's flawed. But earlier before y'all got here, Secretary Ward talked about how they had to step forward, the state had to step forward, our farmers that use the H-2A program be in real trouble this last year. Wes, would you just comment on that?
Yeah, no, I think both congressmen make a great point, and to Mike's point, whether it's a Farm Bureau meeting or just the producers in general, everywhere we go at the state level or national level, one of the first comments that come up is the labor issue, and to the point of finding a better, more effective and efficient way to do that. I think industry's asking and demanding for that as much as they can. And at the state level, trying to implement a federal program, we ran into challenges with that, with it being implemented through the Department of Commerce and Division of Workforce Services. Didn't have the bandwidth, so we partnered with them and had our field inspectors, our ag inspectors, who knew the producers, who knew the issues, knew the farms, knew where they were, and were able to very quickly step in and help them and walk them through the process and conduct housing inspections and do things that just made it make more sense. And that's where I think from an ag standpoint, whether it's forestry or just any other sort of ag labor need, whether it's the USDA or State Department of Agriculture, we know the people, we know the issues, we know where they are. We can be more effective and more efficient in helping them navigate those processes.
You touched on something I think is important to note. The federal government can't be the be-all, end-all of everything related to agriculture production. I think the states can and should do more and be more forward-leaning in developing ag policy that is more relevant to every individual state. And to the point that you mentioned, Mike, that the H-2A program is all you have. That's a fact, and it's sad, but that is all you have. But you shouldn't constrain the states from helping to administer that. And so this is an awful lot like the inspections. We're talking about the meat packers and the inspection associated with that. Look, if the states can certify based on a federal standard, then the states are in a better position to meet that demand, and they're on the ground and can do it. Same thing with for example, inspecting the quarters. That's a requirement of H-2A, and making sure that these farms are inspected. Heck, we got, as Secretary Ward indicated, we have the bandwidth here, the technical expertise. Just give us the certification, and we can do it and make these programs work better.
One thing too to touch on that is a really important topic, avian influenza, but it also comes back to biosecurity. And I know, Wes, you led the FBI training in Little Rock, and America has built up this efficiency with their agriculture, and it's really left us vulnerable to a lot of bioterrorism or terrorism and different things. But from avian influenza and different things, how important is having a biosecurity plan from a farmer's perspective? Or anything you'd want to touch on that?
I would, and I'd certainly love to hear both congressmen's thoughts on this, because I know that they see the importance of it. But what we hosted a conference in Arkansas a few months ago with the FBI for producers and for the ag industry, just trying to stress the importance of whether it's cybersecurity or biosecurity, the threats that exist to agriculture. And if you look at Arkansas and agriculture being our state's largest industry, where's our vulnerabilities? What is the sector of our economy that's so critically important? One, it's agriculture. Take that a step further. Why is agriculture important? Because it's the food, fiber, fuel, and shelter that we depend on every single day. Let some nefarious actors shut that down for a day or a week, and we're in tough shape really quick. And so it's important for us to try to find ways to better protect the industry. I know it's important for both congressmen. Both have done important work on that, and so it's something we got to find better ways to help safeguard and secure, whether it's biosecurity or cybersecurity. Just making sure that we're protecting this incredible resource, which is our state's largest industry.
Well, one of the things that we've done is, recognizing these threats and gaps, weaknesses, vulnerabilities, and it wasn't all about COVID, but a lot of COVID didn't cause everything, but it sure exposed a lot, and it made us more situationally aware. And I would use that term to say that farmers should be more situationally aware, because there are gaps, weaknesses, and vulnerabilities that you don't know what you don't know. And this is where the federal government can and should play a more forward-leaning role in terms of informing, sharing with the ag community. And to that end, one of the things that I'm working on is what's called the Ag Intelligence Measures Act, which gives Title 50 authority to USDA. What that means is Title 50 is intelligence. So it makes USDA a full-fledged member of the intelligence community. This is modeled after the Department of Energy's intelligence community model. And it's don't envision Jason Bourne in a cotton field. That's not what this is about. It's about subject matter expertise. It's about being able to share with the intelligence community, recognizing when you see something that's probably meaningful, valuable to share with the intelligence community, that these ag experts have the ability to do the technical exploitation necessary to keep our food and fiber supply safe. And so you've seen 2 or 3 examples of this. One of them was a couple of years ago where we were seeing seeds sent around the country from China. Well, that's a real problem, and you can look at that as in a variety of ways. I mean, one is if you planted those seeds, we don't know what those seeds are. Are they going to germinate and then eventually possibly pollinate with some sort of lethal gene that could create a problem for us, agronomically, or is it some other sort of toxic substance we're not aware of? What kind of disruptions could that create? My feeling was it was twofold. I mean, it's possible that could have been what the point was. But my feeling was that this was China's way of testing our response to a bio attack. Just to find out where the resources were to how we respond to something like this. That's one example. Another example was a Chinese national caught bringing a bag of dead birds into the airport at Dulles International Airport. To what end, we don't know. But we didn't have the protocols in place to address it. So they were incinerated without a technical intelligence exploitation, so we don't know what that was about. Then the other thing, closer to home, we had rice research stolen from right over here at Stuttgart, Rice Research and Extension Center, and those individuals I think they were caught in Hawaii before they could leave the country. And there are several other instances where this has taken place on other ag research. So not only are there potential threats to the introduction of a high-path avian influenza as an example, or an FMD into a feedlot or some other CAFO, but there's also the stealing of intellectual property that we have to safeguard against. And so for that reason, that's why we're looking for Title 50 authority for USDA.
Yeah, Rick brings up some great points. He's on the Intelligence Committee, so there's things that he learns on that committee that he can't even tell me unless maybe we were inside some kind of a secure area. I've been to some intelligence briefings, and I don't know how you get good night's sleep if you go to those all the time, Rick. But there are real and present threats in our world today, and we're talking about biosecurity, but there are all kinds of security threats. There's been some recent attacks on transformer stations and distribution stations that, again, we think that might be somebody testing the system to see where they can cause disruption in that. But some areas that I think we have more control in are, and you've heard this said before, food security is national security, energy security is national security, and especially on the energy side, we have to do a much better job of producing the energy here. Natural gas is the key ingredient into fertilizer, and fertilizer is the ingredient in agriculture. And when we start looking at supply chains, we know we've got vulnerabilities in supply chains, but we also know the more stuff that we can make here that's not connected to other supply chains around the world, then the more secure we can be. And we've always been a country that's fed ourselves and fed other countries as well. We can't take that for granted, and we have to continue developing those systems and making sure that we've got to the best of our ability, the systems in place on the biosecurity. And as a country, all of our infrastructure has to be more hardened. You saw what happened to attacks on pipelines just in the recent few years. When you start shutting down pipelines, railroads, any kind of transportation system, you start causing some major disruptions in supply chains that we just, quite frankly, can't afford to have.
And speaking on that, on supply chains, really to close on it, obviously the delay in products going out. Congressman Crawford, I know you sit on the committees and you have a lot of insight into that. What are your thoughts on where the supply chain is going to be in 2023?
Well, a lot of our issues with our supply chain are related to our relationship with China and our dependence on China. And so when we think about our supply chain problems from a transportation standpoint, we're relying on China for shipping containers. We're relying on China for the chassis to put those containers on so we can move those chassis inland. We're relying on China for the cranes that lift the shipping containers off the ships onto the chassis and so on. So this dependence on China threatens our own supply chain integrity. And so in order for us to address our domestic supply chain integrity, we first have to have a robust supply chain domestically with regard to how we move those products. So the shipping containers, for example, American-made chassis, American-made cranes, and so on, that we can move these things. That's the physical part of it. And then, as Bruce mentioned, we're vulnerable on the cyber front that threaten to disrupt the movement of goods. We had just averted a rail strike. Now, look, we didn't want to talk about this in public space, but the reality is, we basically exposed a vulnerability there, a $2 billion a day hit if that strike had taken place. Now imagine if an adversary decided to disrupt our rail industry to the tune of $2 billion a day. That's a major economic hit. We have to be diligent about monitoring our freight rail, our all modes of our transportation. But we really need to sort of domesticate our supply chain so that we certainly can address our own needs, and then we can be productive in the global marketplace. But this over-reliance on foreign material for our supply chain can't continue, and I think that's untenable.
Yeah, in those areas, and this is something that the Natural Resources Committee will do a lot of work on with energy and mining. We have jurisdiction over the production of both of those resources when it comes to federal lands and federal waters. So there's been I would call it an attack on domestic energy production, and we've got to make sure that we're using the energy that we have here. And even as there's a push to go to more carbon-free energy sources, that puts a tremendous strain on mining. And America's not only blessed with energy, we're also blessed with minerals and elements. And we can provide those products if we will take them out of the ground. But also America has this mentality of not in my backyard, and where a lot of these deposits lie, you've got people that are trying to protect the extraction of them. So as a result, we're heavily dependent on China from everything from rare earth metals to even copper. And there's a World Bank study that says by 2045, in the next 20 to 25 years, we will have to mine more copper than humans have mined in the history of the world to meet the demands that are out there. We've got those copper deposits in the U.S., but we have to develop them. Otherwise, we're just going to be shipping our wealth overseas to countries like China, who's done a really good job of hoarding these resources around the world. So it's going to be a real focus of ours to use the energy and mineral resources that we have in America to meet our own domestic needs. And some people have this idea that there's not as many fossil fuels being used today as there has been in the past, but that's just not looking at the data. Every single source of energy is on an exponential growth rate as far as usage, including oil and gas and coal. So what we have to do here is figure out how to produce that ourselves, produce it cleaner and safer, but also produce it the most reliable and most affordable kind of energy, because that's what the rest of the world's going to adopt.
Y'all have been so generous with your time, and greatly appreciate having you. And thank you all so much for coming. It's been a fantastic first event. If there's no arguments, we'll end the first harvest recap for 2022 of Arkansas. Thank you all so much for coming, and thank you all so much for being here.